So the Senate squeezed the one big beautiful bill through yesterday with a 50-50 split, and JD Vance cast the deciding vote. The House is going to take up the amendment throughout this week, and the public approval rating on this bill is now hovering at around 24%. So not a super popular bill. Now, this package makes the 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent, adds a range of new tax breaks, and pays only a fraction of these cuts with program cuts, meaning at least 2.4 trillion will be tacked onto the debt over 10 years and up to 5 trillion if the temporary provisions are inevitably extended. But this bill also harms the US from a geopolitical and foreign policy standpoint. First and foremost, clean energy support is where the bill hits the hardest. The bill phases out or repeals nearly all Inflation Reduction Act incentives for wind, solar, batteries, and hydrogen, while imposing difficult to navigate foreign entity of concern rules that make new projects legally risky, and kills the $7,500 consumer EV tax credit by October 1st, which is one of the reasons why Elon Musk is so upset. Now, analysts estimate the move will strand thousands of projects, erase up to 300 gigawatts of planned capacity, and raise power prices by 8 to 10% on Americans. Those cuts hand China an industrial gift. They already control more than 80% of global solar manufacturing and around 60 to 70% of battery minerals. By hobbling U.S. demand as well as U.S. investment in future green energy technology, just as the Chinese are starting to scale their exports, we're going to cement China's lead in the clean energy race and make it harder for American manufacturers to compete in AI-hungry data center markets. And the reason is because often these massive data centers will have their own power systems using cheap renewables on site. And if we eliminate that, this is going to be a problem and it gives China a leg up. But that's not all. On the other side of the spectrum here, Moscow benefits. A slower US transition keeps global oil and gas demand higher for longer, propping up the Kremlin's main revenue stream. Meanwhile, and this one actually surprised me, in order to fund the tax cuts, senators slashed planned funds to refill strategic petroleum reserves from $1.3 billion to just $171 million, which is going to leave the stockpile at a 40-year low during Trump's term. This will shrink America's ability to cushion future supply shocks, including those engineered by Russia or OPEC nations in the Middle East. It's also going to make it very difficult to respond to a crisis or war. This is something the GOP hammered Biden on, and they actually campaigned on it and then ended up being worse than Biden on ensuring America's petroleum reserves are ready to go, just as global instability rises. Now, the bill also slashes funding for USAID by nearly 22%, cutting programs that promote global health, food security, and democratic resilience, precisely the areas where the U.S. has long countered Chinese and Russian influence. Cuts to humanitarian aid and disease prevention weaken America's presence in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America, all regions where Beijing is trying to expand its footprint through the Belt and Road Initiative. At the same time, the bill reduces anti-corruption efforts that will undercut U.S. influence in fragile democracies, opening the space for Russian disinformation and authoritarian entrenchment into their systems. U.S. non-military assistance to key locations that are geopolitically meaningful to the U.S. right now, such as Ukraine, Taiwan, and other Indo-Pacific allies, is being squeezed out, which undermines their long-term resilience just as they face pressure from hostile neighbors that traditionally were our adversaries. Taking all of this together, these USAID cuts telegraph a retreat from global leadership by the United States, and it is one that our adversaries are already racing to exploit, as well as starting to actually be successful in doing so. And we're not even a year into Donald Trump's second term. Beyond China and Russia, the bill creates headaches with allies and trade partners. Europe is preparing to expand its carbon border tariff in 2027. By abandoning all of the climate initiatives, the United States is now inviting automatically triggered European Union levies on American exports, and this weakens trade credibility for the United States. Obviously, Trump will counter with tariffs of his own, which is going to hurt Americans. Now, the new $116 billion foreign corporate retaliation tax and tighter de minimis rules are already drawing warnings of tit-for-tat actions from countries like Canada, other European countries, South Korea, etc., all of which are threatening to fracture multiple supply chain coalitions that the U.S. leans on in order to outcompete authoritarian rivals. Now, the US de minimis threshold is $800, meaning any imported item valued at $800 or less typically can enter the United States without any duties. It's a duty-free, minimal paperwork situation, and it even works for China. Now, this rule helps consumers and small businesses by making low-cost goods cheaper and easier to receive. Obviously, the intent here in this rule was to counter China's flood of cheap goods, but the broad brush that was applied impacts goods from everywhere, including Europe. This is going to hurt small businesses who rely on supplies from places that aren't necessarily our adversaries, including Japan, South Korea, India, even Europe, as I said, or other niche countries where we get very specific products tied to those countries. Even the bill's domestic policies will have additional effects that impact foreign policy and geostrategy abroad. Cuts to multiple social programs, including Medicaid and SNAP, in order to fund tax breaks risks not only the perception of deeper inequality and social unrest within the US, but it creates the reality of it. This is actually going to happen. And these conditions give foreign adversaries an opening to exploit online. It's going to be very easy leverage for Russia and China to amplify the divides and growing inequality within the United States. It's a gift we've given them to use. All of this taken together, the deficits, the energy roadblocks, the diplomatic friction with other countries, the destruction of US soft power through aid, and the reduction of social safety nets within the United States all tilt the playing fields towards China and Russia to undercut US influence both at home and abroad, all of which is a gift to our competitors. In short, the bill is everything a superpower should not be doing.